Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the world without walls. No locked doors, no emergency services, no hospital 3 kilometers away, no number to call when something goes wrong. Just you, the open ground, and everything alive on it that is larger, faster, or more venomous than you are. This is the world your ancestors woke up in every single morning for 300,000 years. And here is what nobody tells you. The thing that killed most of them was not what you think. When people imagine the dangers of prehistoric life, they picture something dramatic. A saber-toothed cat lunging from the shadows, a charging mammoth, a rival tribe closing in with spears raised. These things happened, some of them happened regularly, but the leading causes of death in the ancient world were quieter, smaller, and in many ways far more terrifying than any predator with teeth. Let us start with what the bones actually tell us. Paleopathologists, scientists who study disease and injury in ancient skeletal remains, have spent decades reading the damage written into fossil bones. What they find, again and again, is a consistent story. The most common causes of death among prehistoric humans were infection, parasites, and injury complications. Not lions, not enemy warriors. Tiny, invisible, relentless biological threats that your body could not always fight off without modern medicine. Christina Warrener at Harvard, one of the world's leading researchers in ancient DNA and ancient disease, has extracted microbial evidence from fossilized dental plaque dating back tens of thousands of years. What she finds preserved in those ancient mouths tells a story of constant biological negotiation. Bacteria, fungi, parasites all present and active in bodies that had no antibiotics, no antivirals, and no antiseptics beyond whatever plants they happened to discover worked. A cut on your foot could kill you. A tooth abscess could spread to your brain within weeks. Giving birth was one of the most dangerous things a human body could do. These were not edge cases. These were ordinary facts of life. But let us not ignore the predators, because some of them genuinely were terrifying. For most of human prehistory, your ancestors shared the landscape with animals that viewed them as food. In Africa, where Homo sapiens first evolved, the threat roster was extraordinary. Nile crocodiles patrolled every river. Hippo, still the deadliest large animal in Africa today, blocked access to water. African lions hunted in coordinated groups and were well aware that a lone human separated from the group was catchable. Leopards were patient, silent, and capable of carrying prey heavier than themselves up into trees. But the most documented prehistoric predator attack on early humans may not involve any of those animals. In 1994, researchers studying fossil bones at the site of Swartkrans Cave in South Africa found something chilling. A skull fragment belonging to a Paranthropus robustus, a close relative of early humans living roughly 1.5 to 2 million years ago, had 2 holes punched through it in a very specific pattern. C.K. Brain and his team determined the spacing and angle of those holes matched perfectly with the lower canine teeth of a leopard. The skull had been carried into the tree by a leopard. This ancient human was prey. Your ancestors knew this. They were not naive about the world they lived in. Researcher Dennis Bramble and Daniel Lieberman published influential work on how the human body was shaped, in part, by predator pressure. The ability to run long distances, to throw accurately, to coordinate in groups, all of these evolved partly because the stakes of getting caught alone were fatal. You did not wander away from the group at dusk. You did not sleep in exposed places if you could help it. You chose sleeping sites carefully, elevated ground, dense brush, caves with defensible entrances. Fire was one of your most powerful tools against predators. Research by Andrew Sorensen and colleagues on the use of fire by early humans suggests controlled fire use dating back at least 400,000 years. A fire kept burning through the night does something remarkable. Almost no large predator in Africa will approach an open flame. The ring of firelight was not just warmth, it was a wall. But even with fire, the night held dangers your ancestors could not always see coming. Snakes. Across sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Americas, all the regions where anatomically modern humans lived and moved, venomous snakes were a constant and serious threat. Lynn Isbell, a primatologist at UC Davis, has developed what she calls the snake detection theory. She argues that the extraordinary visual acuity of primates, including humans, our ability to detect subtle patterns, sudden movement, and partially hidden shapes, evolved primarily as a response to predatory snakes. Your sharp eyes, your ability to spot something slightly wrong in a visual scene, may exist because your ancestors who failed to notice a coiled cobra in the grass did not survive to have children. Think about that the next time you feel a sudden irrational dread at something moving in your peripheral vision. That is not anxiety. That is ancient threat detection working exactly as designed. Then there were other humans. The question of how violent prehistoric humans were toward each other is one of the most debated in anthropology. The evidence is genuinely complicated. Some sites suggest remarkably low levels of interpersonal violence. Lawrence Keeley's landmark book, War Before Civilization, argued that prehistoric violence rates were actually higher, proportionally, than modern warfare, a conclusion drawn from skeletal trauma patterns and fortification evidence. Other researchers, including Douglas Fry, have pushed back hard, pointing to the hundreds of documented forager societies that show little evidence of organized warfare. What the bones consistently do show is this: interpersonal violence existed. It was not universal, and it was not constant, but it was real. Skulls with healed fractures, spear points embedded in vertebrae, bodies buried with evidence of traumatic injury inflicted by other humans. At the site of Nataruk in Kenya, researchers discovered the remains of at least 27 people who died violently approximately 10,000 years ago, one of the earliest known examples of what looks like a massacre. Many had shattered bones, bound hands, and projectile wounds consistent with a coordinated attack. The site, published in Nature by Marta Mirazon-Lar and her team, suggested that even before permanent settlements, conflict between groups was a real and lethal possibility. But context matters enormously here. Groups that competed for scarce water sources or prime hunting territory had reasons for conflict that groups with abundant resources did not. Violence was not a permanent state. It was a risk, contingent on circumstances, geography, and season. Water itself was a threat. Not just crocodiles. The water your ancestors drank was often contaminated by animal waste, by decomposing matter, by naturally occurring toxins and pathogens. Waterborne illness like cholera, giardia, and typhoid-like infections would have been regular killers. Groups that knew their water sources well, that chose running water over stagnant pools, that used certain plants or minerals to treat water, these groups survived longer. This knowledge was not written down. It was carried in story, in practice, in the accumulated wisdom of elders who had watched others get sick and die. Which brings us to perhaps the most underestimated threat of all: cold. Not the dramatic killing cold of a blizzard, though that killed too. The slow, grinding cold of a wet night without adequate shelter. The kind of cold that pulls heat from your body over hours, drops your core temperature below functioning range, and simply stops your heart while you sleep. Hypothermia does not announce itself the way a predator does. It is quiet and patient, and it does not need teeth. As Homo sapiens moved out of Africa into Europe and Asia during the period between 70,000 and 40,000 years ago, they moved into climates their bodies had not evolved for. Ice Age Europe was a different world. Glaciers covered much of the northern continent. Winters lasted 8 months. The animals were enormous: woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, cave bears that stood 3 meters tall when upright. The cave bear, Ursus spelaeus, deserves a special mention. These animals were not a myth. Skeletal remains have been found across Europe and Asia. Adults weighed up to 500 kilograms. They used the same caves your ancestors used for shelter. Evidence from sites like Chauvet Cave in France suggests that early humans and cave bears were in direct competition for the same living spaces. The bones of cave bears found in these spaces show scratch marks from human tools. The bones of some early humans found in the same regions show marks consistent with bear attack. This was not a theoretical danger, and yet your ancestors survived all of it. Every single one of the threats described here: predators, parasites, infections, violence, cold, hunger, thirst, your lineage survived them all. Not because individual humans were exceptional, though many were, but because the group was the technology. This is the thing that modern life has almost completely hidden from view. Your ancestors did not survive as individuals. They survived as networks. Knowledge of safe water sources, edible and toxic plants, animal behavior, seasonal weather patterns, wound treatment, childbirth practice, shelter construction. None of this existed in any single person's head. It existed distributed across the group, embedded in story and practice, and the particular knowledge of particular elders who had seen things no one else had seen. Losing a knowledgeable elder was not just a personal tragedy, it was a loss of irreplaceable survival data. Polly Wiesner's research among the Yu-Huansi documented how information about distant food and water resources, places that might only be visited once a decade, was kept alive through storytelling and social relationship across generations. Forgetting those stories could, in the wrong season, be fatal. You are the descendant of people who faced all of this and kept walking, who nursed each other through infection with whatever tools they had, who learned which snake was lethal and passed that knowledge to their children, who sat around fires through dangerous nights and told stories that carried survival information wrapped in the form of myth. The world tried to end your line 300,000 times in 100 different forms. It did not succeed. Close your eyes again. The world without walls, the darkness outside the firelight, the things that moved in it. Your ancestors looked into that darkness every night, and every morning they woke up anyway.